5 mindset shifts that changed my mind, a journey from limitation to liberation. Introduction: the power of perspective. What if I told you that 5 easy changes in the way you think could make your whole life different? Not magic formulas or secret techniques, but fundamental changes in how you interpret the world around you. Changes so profound that they don't just alter what you do, they transform who you become. I'm not talking about surface-level positive thinking or feel-good mantras that fade when reality hits. I'm talking about deep structural shifts in perspective that create lasting change in how you experience everything from daily challenges to life-defining moments. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that 5 years ago, I was living a life of quiet desperation, successful on paper, but hollow on the inside. I had achieved what I thought I wanted, yet I felt more lost than ever. I was trapped in patterns of thinking that kept me small, scared, and stuck. Today I live with a sense of freedom and possibility I couldn't have imagined. Not because my circumstances are perfect, but because my relationship to my circumstances has been revolutionized. The same challenges that once defeated me now energize me. The same uncertainties that once paralyzed me now excite me. The difference isn't luck, talent, or privilege. The difference is 5 fundamental shifts in mindset that rewired how I see myself, my challenges, and my possibilities. These aren't theories I learned from books, though research supports every one of them. These are realizations forged in the fire of real life, tested in moments of crisis, and proven through years of application. They've been the foundation not just of my success, but of my sanity, my relationships, and my sense of purpose. Mindset shift number 1. From I am my problems to I have challenges. Learning to separate identity from circumstances. The first shift that changed everything was learning the difference between being my problems and having challenges. This might sound like semantics, but the distinction literally saved my life. For most of my adult life, I lived in a state of identity fusion with my difficulties. When I faced financial stress, I wasn't someone dealing with money problems. I was broke. When I struggled with anxiety, I wasn't someone experiencing anxious thoughts. I was an anxious person. When relationships ended, I wasn't someone going through heartbreak. I was unlovable. This fusion between self and circumstance created a prison I couldn't see, let alone escape. When you have your problems, you can't solve them because solving them would mean destroying yourself. When you are your limitations, you can't grow beyond them because growth would mean becoming someone else entirely. The breakthrough came during what I now call my dark night of the soul, a period when multiple areas of my life were falling apart simultaneously. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot, crying from exhaustion and hopelessness when a simple thought emerged. I am not these problems. I am the person experiencing these problems. It sounds almost absurd in its simplicity, but this distinction created space where none had existed before. Space between me and my circumstances. Space between my identity and my temporary conditions. Space where solutions could breathe and grow. Challenging period. Instead of, I'm broken, I would say, I'm healing. Neither denial nor optimistic thinking was involved. It was right. Brokenness is a transient state. It is not a permanent identity. Depression is something I experience. Failure is something that occurs. The results were immediate and profound. When I stopped being my problems and started having challenges, I could address them with curiosity rather than shame. I could ask, how do I solve this? Instead of, what's wrong with me? I could seek help without feeling like I was admitting to some fundamental flaw in my character. This shift also revealed something remarkable. Many of the problems I thought were massive were actually quite manageable once I separated them from my identity. Financial stress became a math problem to solve rather than evidence of my worth. Relationship conflicts became communication challenges rather than proof of my inadequacy. But perhaps most importantly, this shift allowed me to maintain my sense of self even during difficult times. I learned that I could go through depression without being depressed, experience failure without being a failure, face rejection without being rejected as a person. Your challenges are not your identity. They are temporary visitors in the house of your life. Some stay longer than others, some are more disruptive than others, but none of them are permanent residents. You are the house, not the visitors. I started practicing this separation consciously. Instead of saying, I'm depressed, I would say, I'm experiencing depression. Instead of, I'm a failure. When you truly grasp this distinction, everything changes. You stop defending your problems and start solving them. You stop hiding your struggles and start addressing them. You stop being ashamed of your humanity and start embracing the growth that comes through difficulty. This is the foundation that makes all other shifts possible. The recognition that you are larger than any challenge you face, more resilient than any setback you experience, and more capable than any limitation you've accepted. Mindset shift number 2, from I need to be perfect to I'm learning and growing, embracing growth mindset over perfectionism. The second shift that transformed my life was releasing the prison of perfectionism and embracing the freedom of growth. This wasn't just about being easier on myself. It was about fundamentally changing my relationship with failure, progress, and human development. Perfectionism has been my strategy for feeling safe in an uncertain world. If I could just be flawless, I reasoned, I would be beyond criticism, beyond rejection, beyond failure. I would be worthy of love, success, and happiness. This belief drove me to extraordinary achievements, but also extraordinary misery. The perfectionistic mindset created an impossible standard. Anything less than perfect was failure, and failure was unacceptable. This meant I was either succeeding perfectly or failing completely, with no middle ground for learning, experimenting, or growing. I was profoundly but subtly inhibited by this binary thinking. I would avoid opportunities where I might not excel immediately. I would abandon projects at the first sign of difficulty. I would interpret constructive feedback as devastating criticism. I was always afraid of being identified as flawed, which meant I was always afraid of being human. The shift began when I encountered a simple question that shattered my perfectionist paradigm. What if the goal isn't to be perfect, but to be learning? This question introduced me to what researchers call a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. It was the opposite of the fixed mindset I had been operating from, which treated qualities like intelligence, talent, and worth as unchangeable characteristics you either had or didn't have. I started experimenting with this new framework in small ways. When I made a mistake, instead of asking, "How could I be so stupid?" In situations when I was struggling, I would ask myself, "What can I learn from this?" Rather, "I'm not good at this yet." That single word, yet, became revolutionary. Every time I struggled with something, I thought, "I'm not good at this yet," instead of, "I'm not good at this yet." It changed my perspective on everything. What can I learn from this? It suggested that struggle wasn't evidence of inadequacy, but evidence of learning and progress. As I practiced this shift, I noticed remarkable changes in my behavior. I started taking on challenges I had previously avoided. I began viewing feedback as valuable information rather than personal attack. I stopped hiding my struggles and started seeing them as natural parts of the growth process. Most surprisingly, my actual performance improved dramatically. When I stopped trying to be perfect, I paradoxically started getting better results. This seemed counterintuitive until I understood the mechanism. Perfectionism had been preventing the very experimentation and risk-taking that leads to genuine improvement, growing, evolving being, and that's not a consolation prize. It's your greatest. The fear of making mistakes had been making me make bigger mistakes. the mistake of not trying, not learning, not growing. When I embraced imperfection as part of the learning process, I could finally access my full potential because I wasn't holding back out of fear. This shift also transformed my relationships. I stopped expecting others to be perfect, which made me more compassionate and understanding. I stopped hiding my own imperfections, which made me more authentic and approachable. I discovered that people connect with struggles, not perfection. The growth mindset revealed something profound about human nature. We're not designed to be perfect. We're designed to be learning. Our brains are literally wired for growth, adaptation, and improvement throughout our entire lives. Perfectionism fights against our fundamental nature, while the growth mindset aligns with it. I learned to celebrate progress rather than demanding perfection. I learned to see setbacks as setups for comebacks. I learned that mastery isn't about never failing. It's about getting better at recovering from failure. Today, when I face new challenges, I don't ask, "Can I do this perfectly?" I was curious, what can I learn from this? I don't fight criticism instead. I use it to develop understanding. I don't hide my faults. I learn from them. This shift from perfectionism to growth orientation isn't just about being kinder to yourself, though it accomplishes that. It's about unlocking your actual potential instead of being constrained by imaginary standards. It's about engaging with life as a learning laboratory rather than a pass-fail exam. Your worth isn't determined by your performance. Your identity isn't threatened by your imperfections. Your potential isn't limited by your current abilities. You are a learning strength. Mindset shift number 3. From life happens to me to I co-create my reality. The third shift that revolutionized my existence was perhaps the most profound. Moving from seeing myself as a victim of circumstances to understanding myself as an active co-creator of my reality. This transformation didn't just change what I did, it changed who I fundamentally believed myself to be. Picture this. For the first 30 years of my life, I lived like a passenger on a bus I didn't choose, going to destinations I didn't pick, with a driver I couldn't see. Sometimes the ride was smooth, sometimes bumpy, sometimes terrifying, but in all cases, I believed I was just along for the ride, hoping the driver would eventually take me somewhere I wanted to go. This passenger mentality had me constantly scanning the horizon for the right circumstances, the perfect job that would fall into my lap, the ideal relationship that would find me without effort, the lucky break that would solve all my problems. I was living in what psychologists call learned helplessness, convinced that my happiness, success, and fulfillment were entirely dependent on external forces aligning in my favor. The wake-up call came during a particularly difficult period when I found myself complaining to a friend about my circumstances. Again, my job was unfulfilling, my relationships were strained, my finances were tight, and I felt stuck in every area of life. After listening patiently, my friend asked a question that shattered my worldview. "What are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" I replied, incredulous. "These things are happening to me." "Are they?" she asked quietly. "Or are you participating in creating them?" That question haunted me for weeks. The more I examined my life with honest eyes, the more I began to see patterns I had been blind to. I wasn't just experiencing circumstances. I was unconsciously contributing to their creation through my choices, my responses, and even my expectations. I realized I had been operating from what I now call the victim operating system, a set of unconscious beliefs that position me as powerless. Things happen to me, not because of me. I have no choice in my circumstances. Other people determine my happiness. External conditions must change for my life to improve. I'm helpless against forces beyond of my control. I felt secure using this operating system since it shielded me from accountability and possible failure. If I wasn't really in control, then I couldn't really be blamed when things went wrong. But this protection came at an enormous cost. It also meant I couldn't take credit when things went right. And more importantly, I couldn't actively make things go right. The shift began when I encountered a radically different operating system, what I call the co-creator operating system. I participate in creating my experience of reality. While I can't control everything, I can influence much more than I realize. My responses to circumstances shape my future circumstances. I have the power to interpret events in ways that serve my growth. I actively participate in constructing my life narrative. It wasn't about accepting responsibility for anything that happened to me. It would be detrimental and unattainable. It is inexplicable why nice people experience bad things. Natural disasters, systemic injustices, and the destructive decisions of others can have a significant impact on our life in ways that we neither caused nor deserve. But even in the face of difficult circumstances, I discovered I had far more power than I had been using. The power to choose my response, the power to decide how important events should be, the power to determine where to focus my attention and energy, the power to decide what story to tell myself about what was happening. It's what I call conscious responsibility that helped me stop responding mindlessly to things and think about them before I responded. At that moment, my first thought would be, how should I respond to this? What response would serve my growth and goals? What significance would I like to give this experience? The transformation was remarkable. I decided to view my job loss, which would have normally made me feel like a victim, as the world urged me to pursue an entrepreneurial career path I had been too scared to pursue. When a relationship ended, instead of feeling rejected and unlovable, I chose to see it as information about compatibility and an opportunity to develop a better relationship with myself. This shift from victim to co-creator revealed opportunities that had been invisible when I was focused on what I couldn't control. I became aware of options I had been ignoring, possibilities I had been ignorant to, and options I had been neglecting. It was as if someone had turned on lights in rooms I didn't even know existed. One of the most powerful realizations was understanding the difference between control and influence. I couldn't control outcomes, but I could influence them through my preparation, effort, attitude, and persistence. I couldn't control other people's responses, but I could influence them through my authenticity, kindness, and communication. I couldn't control market conditions, but I could influence my position in the market through skill development and adaptability. I learned to distinguish between three categories of circumstances: things I can control, my thoughts, attitudes, responses, efforts, and choices; things I can influence, outcomes through preparation, relationships through behavior, opportunities through networking and skill building; things I cannot control, other people's choices, natural events, market forces, and past events. I found that category 3 had consumed the majority of my energy as I worried, grumbled, and attempted to exert control over situations that were really outside of my control. When I redirected that energy to categories 1 and 2, my life began changing rapidly. Perhaps most importantly, this shift changed my relationship with uncertainty and setbacks. I began to view uncertainty as a creative space where new ideas may arise, rather than as a threat. Instead of viewing setbacks as evidence of my powerlessness, I began seeing them as information about what needed to be adjusted. I developed what I call the co-creator's toolkit, a set of questions I ask myself when facing any situation. What can I control or influence in this situation? What opportunity might be hidden within this challenge? How can I respond in a way that serves my growth? What story do I want to tell myself about this experience? What would someone who felt empowered do in this situation? The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within 2 years of making this shift, I had started my own business, improved my relationships dramatically, increased my income by 300%, and most importantly, felt genuinely empowered and excited about my life for the first time in decades. But the most profound change wasn't external, it was internal. I started to feel as though I was happening to life instead of life happening to me. I stopped waiting for permission and started taking initiative. I stopped hoping for rescue and started developing resourcefulness. This doesn't mean I never face difficulties or that I can control everything through positive thinking. Life still brings challenges, losses, and circumstances beyond my control. But now, I face them as an empowered participant rather than a helpless victim. I work with the raw materials of circumstance to build something meaningful rather than waiting for perfect materials to be delivered. The shift from victim to co-creator isn't just about changing your circumstances. It's about changing your relationship with your circumstances. It's about recognizing that while you may not be able to control what happens to you, you always have the power to influence what happens next. You are not just a passenger on this journey called life. You are the driver, the navigator, and in many ways the architect of the road itself. When you embrace this truth, you don't just change your life. You reclaim your power to consciously create a life worth living. Your reactions to your circumstances define you, not your circumstances itself. Your past doesn't determine your future. Your choices do. You are the creator of your tale, not its victim. The following chapter is awaiting your writing. Mindset shift number 4. From I need to have all the answers to questions are more powerful than answers. The fourth transformation liberated me from the exhausting pressure of needing to know everything and introduced me to the creative power of curiosity. This shift didn't just change how I approached problems, it changed how I engaged with life itself. I had spent decades believing that intelligence meant having answers, that competence required certainty, and that confidence came from knowing what to do in every situation. This created enormous pressure to figure everything out in advance, and crushing shame whenever I encountered something I didn't understand. This need for answers made me rigid, defensive, and closed to new information. When someone challenged my position, I felt obligated to defend it rather than explore it. When I encountered problems I couldn't immediately solve, I felt inadequate rather than curious. When faced with uncertainty, I felt anxious rather than excited about what I might discover. The imprisonment of needing to know everything kept me stuck in familiar territories. I avoided situations where my knowledge might be tested. I surrounded myself with information that confirmed what I already believed. I chose predictable paths over interesting ones because predictable felt safer than mysterious. The liberation came through a simple but profound realization. The most successful, creative, and fulfilled people I knew weren't those who had all the answers. They were those who asked the best questions. I started paying attention to how questions worked in my life and was amazed by their power. A good question could reframe an entire situation. The right question could reveal options I hadn't seen. A different question could transform a problem into an opportunity. I began experimenting with replacing statements with questions. Instead of, I don't know how to do this, I would ask, who could teach me? Instead of, this is impossible, I would ask, what would make this possible? Rather than saying, I'm stuck, I would inquire, what am I not seeing? This shift from answers to questions unlocked creativity I didn't know I possessed. Questions opened up space for exploration, experimentation, and discovery. They invited possibility rather than demanding certainty. They created movement rather than paralysis. I discovered that there were different types of questions with different powers. Some questions trapped me in limitation. Why me? What if I fail? Who do I think I am? What can I learn from this? Was one of the other inquiries that broadened my perspective. How might this work? The quality of my questions directly determined the quality of my life. Poor questions led to poor experiences. Powerful questions led to powerful experiences. I realized I could literally think my way into better realities by asking better questions. This shift also transformed my relationships. Instead of trying to impress people with what I knew, I started connecting with them through what I was curious about. Instead of defending my opinions, I started exploring other perspectives. Instead of trying to be the smartest person in the room, I started trying to ask the most interesting questions. Curiosity became my secret weapon in every area of life. When faced with conflict, I would ask, what might they be experiencing that I don't understand? When encountering resistance, I would ask, what need is this resistance trying to protect? When I was frustrated, I would wonder, what is this frustration trying to teach me? I learned that questions were not just tools for gathering information. They were instruments of transformation. The right question at the right time could shift an entire life trajectory. Questions could dissolve barriers that willpower couldn't budge. They could create connections that force couldn't establish. Perhaps most surprisingly, embracing questions made me feel more confident, not less. I was able to learn everything I needed to know once I stopped pretending to know everything. When I admitted what I didn't understand, people wanted to help me understand. When I expressed curiosity, others became curious about me. The pressure to have all the answers had been preventing me from finding the right answers. Fear of appearing ignorant had kept me ignorant. The need to appear competent had been limiting my actual competence. Questions also revealed the dynamic nature of reality. The environment I lived in was not permanent and unchangeable, but rather fluid and responsive. By asking different questions, I could literally discover different worlds within the same circumstances. Today, when I face challenges, my first instinct isn't to find answers, it's to find better questions. When I feel stuck, I don't look for solutions. I look for new ways to frame the problem. When I find obstacles, I don't push harder. I dig deeper. This shift from needing answers to embracing questions transformed me from someone who was constrained by what he knew into someone who was liberated by what he could discover. It changed me from someone who feared the unknown into someone who was energized by mystery. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to figure everything out in advance. You don't need to know your destination to take the next step. What you need is curiosity, openness, and the willingness to let questions guide you toward discoveries you couldn't have planned. The most powerful force in your life isn't what you know. It's what you're willing to explore. Mindset shift number 5. From success means avoiding failure to failure is information. The 5th and final shift that revolutionized my life was transforming my relationship with failure from enemy to ally, from something to avoid to something to embrace as essential information for growth and success. This transformation didn't happen overnight. For most of my life, failure felt like a verdict on my worth, a confirmation of my inadequacy, a public announcement of my insufficiency. I organized my entire life around avoiding it, which meant I organized my life around staying small, safe, and stagnant. My fear of failure was so intense that I would rather not try than risk being seen as unsuccessful. I preferred certainty over opportunity, comfort over growth, and mediocrity over the risk of glaring flaws. I was succeeding at avoiding failure, but failing at actually living. This avoidance strategy seemed logical. If failure was bad, then avoiding it must be good. If mistakes were shameful, then preventing them must be virtuous. If being wrong was embarrassing, then being correct had to be too. This logic kept me stuck in a cage of my own design. The breakthrough came when I found a fundamentally different view of failure, not as the inverse of success, but as an integral component of it, not as something that happened when you weren't good enough, but as something that happened when you were brave enough to attempt something challenging. I started studying the lives of people I admired and made a startling discovery. Every single person who had achieved something meaningful had a trail of failures behind them. Not despite their success, but as the foundation of their success. Their failures weren't evidence of their inadequacy. They were evidence of their willingness to push boundaries, take risks, and attempt things that mattered. This led to a profound reframe. Failure wasn't the opposite of success, it was raw material for success. Every failure contained information that could make future success more likely. Every mistake revealed assumptions that needed updating. Every setback provided feedback that could improve future performance. I began to see failure as a teacher rather than an enemy. When something didn't work out as planned, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" I started thinking, "What can I learn from this?" instead of feeling ashamed of mistakes. I began feeling curious about the information they contained. This shift required developing what I call failure resilience. Not the ability to avoid failure, but the ability to extract value from it quickly and move forward. I learned to separate the occurrence of failing from the identification of being a failure. I could fail at something without being a failure as a person. I started keeping what I called a failure resume, a record of my most spectacular mistakes and what I learned from each one. This practice transformed my relationship with failure from shame to pride. I began to see my willingness to fail as evidence of my courage, not my weakness. The results were immediate and profound. When I stopped fearing failure, I started taking risks I had avoided for years. When I stopped seeing mistakes as verdicts, I started seeing them as experiments. When I stopped aiming to seem perfect, I began to strive for improvement. This shift unleashed creativity I didn't know I possessed. Fear of failure had been constraining my thinking to safe ideas, concepts that were unlikely to fail but also unlikely to succeed dramatically. When I embraced failure as information, I could explore wild possibilities, knowing that even if they didn't work, they would teach me something valuable. When I stopped aiming to seem perfect, I began to strive for improvement. Some failures were expensive and taught costly lessons about preparation or judgment. Other failures were cheap experiments that provided valuable data at low cost. The key was to fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward, using each failure to get closer to success. Perhaps most importantly, this shift changed how I defined success itself. Instead of measuring success by the absence of failure, I started measuring it by the quality of my attempts, the speed of my learning, and the courage of my efforts. Success wasn't about perfection, it was about progression. I discovered that many of the failures I had been so afraid of weren't actually that bad when they happened. The shame and fear I had attached to them were often worse than the actual experience. The anticipation of failure was more paralyzing than failure itself. This shift also improved my decision-making dramatically. When I wasn't afraid of being wrong, I could make decisions based on the best available information, rather than on the need to be certain. I could take action while learning rather than waiting until I was sure, which of course never came. The transformation was so complete that I eventually started seeking out opportunities to fail, not because I wanted to fail, but because I wanted to attempt things that were challenging enough that failure was possible. I realized that if I wasn't failing occasionally, I wasn't pushing hard enough. Today, when I face a potential failure, I don't ask, "How can I avoid this?" I ask, "What can I learn if this doesn't work?" When I make mistakes, I don't hide them. I study them. When projects don't turn out as planned, I don't feel defeated. I feel educated. Failure is not your enemy. It's your teacher, your guide, your source of information about what works and what doesn't. It's not a judgment of your worth. It's feedback about your methods. It's not a reason to quit. It's a reason to adjust and continue. The paradox is profound. When you stop being afraid of failure, you dramatically increase your chances of success. When you embrace failure as information, you learn faster than those who avoid it. You get ahead of people who hold still to keep from falling, while you fail forward. Your failures demonstrate your bravery rather than your lack of ability. Every failure represents a moment when you chose growth over safety, possibility over certainty, action over paralysis. Honor them, learn from them, and let them guide you toward the success that's waiting on the other side of fear. Integration, living the shifts. These 5 mindset shifts didn't happen in isolation. They worked together, reinforcing each other to create a complete transformation in how I experience life. Understanding them intellectually was just the beginning. The real change came from integrating them into daily practice until they became automatic ways of thinking. The first shift, separating identity from challenges, created the foundation for all others. When I stopped having my problems and started having challenges, I could approach difficulties with curiosity rather than shame. This made it possible to embrace failure as information rather than avoid it as an identity threat. The second shift, moving from perfectionism to growth orientation, removed the pressure that had been paralyzing me. When I stopped needing to be perfect, I could start learning from failure. When I embraced being a work in progress, I could take the risks necessary for growth. The third shift, from victim to co-creator, empowered me to take action rather than wait for circumstances to change. When I realized I could influence my experience, I became willing to experiment, fail, and learn. I began to create possibilities instead of waiting for approval. The fourth shift, embracing questions over answers, opened up possibilities I couldn't see when I was focused on being right. Curiosity became the engine of growth, driving me to explore beyond my comfort zone and discover solutions I couldn't have imagined. The fifth shift, reframing failure as information, removed the final barrier to full engagement with life. When I stopped fearing failure, I could finally pursue opportunities worthy of my potential. When mistakes became teachers, every experience became valuable. Together, these shifts created what I call anti-fragile confidence. Not confidence that nothing bad will happen, but confidence that I can handle whatever happens and grow stronger through the experience. This confidence isn't based on past achievements or future guarantees. It's based on present capabilities and adaptive capacity. The integration process required patience and practice. Old thinking patterns don't disappear overnight. They're neural pathways carved deep by years of repetition. But with conscious effort and consistent application, new pathways can be created and strengthened until they become the default way of thinking. I developed daily practices to reinforce these shifts: morning intention setting, to choose my mindset; evening reflection to process experiences through the new frameworks; regular check-ins to catch old patterns and redirect them; and deliberate challenges to practice the new ways of thinking under pressure. Above all, I discovered the importance of patience with the process. Change happens in spirals, not straight lines. I occasionally reverted to my old habits, and there were times when I was afraid. Situations where I forgot everything I had learned. This was part of the journey, not a failure of it. The compound effect of these shifts has been extraordinary. Each one made the others stronger. Together, they've created a life that's not just different from what I had before, but different from what I thought was possible. Your transformation starts now. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to know that everything I've shared with you is available to you right now. These aren't special abilities that some people have and others don't. They're not privileges reserved for the lucky few. They're fundamental capacities that every human being possesses. The mindset you have right now isn't permanent. It's not your destiny. It's not even really yours. It's a collection of thoughts, beliefs, and patterns you've inherited, absorbed, and practiced until they became automatic. But what has been learned can be unlearned. What has been programmed can be reprogrammed. Your transformation doesn't require perfect circumstances, unlimited time, or special resources. It requires only 2 things: awareness of your current patterns, and willingness to practice new ones. The awareness comes from honest self-examination. The willingness comes from recognizing that your current patterns aren't serving you. Start with one shift that resonates most strongly with you. Don't try to change everything at once. That's perfectionist thinking, and you're learning to grow beyond that. Pick the shift that feels most relevant to your current challenges and begin practicing it in small ways. If you're struggling with identity fusion, practice the first shift by changing your language. Instead of, "I am anxious," say, "I'm experiencing anxiety." Instead of, "I'm a failure," say, "I'm going through a challenging time." Notice how this simple linguistic change creates space for solutions. If perfectionism is holding you back, practice the second shift by celebrating progress instead of demanding perfection. Set learning goals rather than performance goals. Ask, "What can I discover?" instead of, "How can I avoid mistakes?" If you feel helpless, find out what you can influence and control, and use the third shift to focus your energy there rather than on uncontrollable things. Focus your energy there instead of on circumstances beyond your control. Ask, "How can I respond to this?" Rather, consider this: "Why am I going through this?" If you feel trapped by what you don't know, practice the fourth shift by getting curious. Replace statements with questions. Instead of, "I don't know how," ask, "Who could teach me?" Rather than saying, "This is impossible," inquire, "What would make this possible?" If fear of failure is limiting you, practice the fifth shift by reframing mistakes as information. Keep a learning notebook in which you document the lessons you learn from each setback. Ask, "What can I learn from this?" instead of, "How could I have been so stupid?" Remember, these shifts are not destinations, they're directions. You don't have to master them perfectly. You just have to practice them consistently. Each time you catch an old, your journey of transformation starts now, not tomorrow, not when you have more time, not when circumstances improve. Now, with your next thought, with your next choice, with your next opportunity to apply one of these shifts. The person you're becoming is already within you, waiting to emerge. These mindset shifts are simply the keys to unlock that potential. Turn the key. Open the door. Step into the life that's been waiting for you. Pattern and consciously choose a new response. You strengthen the neural pathways of transformation. Be patient with yourself. Be kind to your learning process. Celebrate small victories. Notice subtle improvements. Keep in mind that all experts were once terrified, and all masters were once beginners. Your life is not a fixed story with a predetermined ending. It's a living narrative that you're writing with every thought, every choice, every response to what life brings you. The key to changing that narrative is not altering your situation. Rather, it is altering how you respond to it. These 5 shifts have the power to transform not just what you do, but who you become. Not just how you succeed, but how you define success. Not just how you handle challenges, but how you grow through them. The life you want isn't waiting for you to become perfect enough to claim it. It's waiting for you to become brave enough to believe it's possible and wise enough to know that transformation happens. One thought, one choice, one shift at a time. Your time is now. Your power is real. Your transformation is inevitable. Welcome to the beginning of everything. Conclusion: the journey continues. Keep in mind that change is about more than just being perfect. You don't have to be an expert in 5 shifts immediately. You don't need to never fall back into old patterns. You just need to keep choosing the new way of thinking more often than the old way until the new way becomes natural. These shifts have changed my life completely. They can change yours too, not because they're magical, but because they're practical. Not because they eliminate challenges. But this is not the end of our conversation. It's the beginning of your transformation. The 5 mindset shifts you've discovered today are not just ideas to understand, but tools to apply. Not just concepts to appreciate, but practices to integrate into the fabric of your daily life. The journey from limitation to liberation is not a destination you reach, but a direction you choose. Again and again, moment by moment, thought by thought, every day will bring opportunities to practice these shifts, to choose growth over safety, curiosity over certainty, resilience over resistance, because they transform your relationship with challenges. Not because they guarantee easy success, but because they make meaningful growth inevitable. The person listening to these words right now has everything they need to begin this transformation. You have a brain capable of rewiring itself. You have experiences that can be reinterpreted. You have choices that can be made differently. You have a future that can be written differently than your past. 5 mindset shifts. Infinite possibilities. The journey starts now. I appreciate you letting me be a part of this adventure. I hope that these changes will benefit you as much as they have me. May you discover that you are far more capable, resilient, and creative than you ever imagined. The world is waiting to see what becomes possible when you shift your mindset. Go show them.